What is up, Internet? I am really excited to kick off this channel, Maple Moneymakers, where we will discuss the successes and failures of Canadian companies. Let's get it going with the biggest company of them all, up here in the north, RBC. I would bet that every Canadian has seen this giant bank's logo at least once in the past week. They serve about 17 million clients in the world. That's about half of Canada's population. In our nation alone, they have over 1,200 branches, the most of any Canadian bank. Last year, the company had over 15 billion in net income, which places them second amongst the big five, only falling behind TD. In this video, we will dive deeper into RBC and look at the 5 main reasons that contributed to their success and their journey to the top. RBC was established in Halifax in 1864, a few years before Canada was even founded. Back then, they went by Merchants Bank and were started by 8 merchants, which included Thomas Kinnear, Edward Kenny, and William Cunard. As they were getting started, they would provide credits to traders, who used the ports to import and export goods. In 1869, a few years after Canada's birth, the Merchants Bank of Halifax would obtain a federal charter which allows them to operate under federal jurisdiction. This brings us to the first reason that propelled them to the top: their financial position. RBC and its Big Five peers enjoy certain privileges that competitors may not have. Would you believe that RBC's current accounts only totaled $500,000 in 1869? Flash forward a century and a half later, and RBC's net income in the last 5 years averages almost $14 billion annually, leading the Big Five. RBC's financial position gives it a competitive advantage in the market. In 1882, the bank set sail beyond Canada and started operating in Bermuda, Cuba, and by 1899, they also started to operate in New York. This brings us to our second reason that sent RBC to the top: their focus on purpose, vision, and values. Their purpose is to help clients thrive and communities prosper, and their vision is to be a world leader in the financial system, fostering trust and showcasing success. They would of course show this to the world as they continued to expand. In 1899, Edson Pease was selected as the bank's GM, and with him it really went from a regional operation to one that is genuinely national. By 1901, Merchants executives wanted to promote an inclusive name that would promote expansion towards the West, and Royal Bank of Canada was born. By this point, the company was operating from east to west coast. A number of branches were opened in BC to support the Klondike Gold Rush. Recognizing that St. James Street in Montreal was the core of Canada's financial system, they moved their headquarters there and said au revoir to Halifax. A few years later, they would report their first $1 million annual profit in 1911. The bank continued to expand after World War I, opening branches in Barcelona, Paris, Brazil, Argentina, and Peru between 1918 and 1919. By 1925, RBC was Canada's largest bank, boasting 18.7% of Canadian bank assets and having branches in 801 communities across the nation. Edson did so by amalgamating banks like Union Bank of Canada and Northern Crown under RBC's incorporation. And by 1929, Edson would bring the bank's asset value to $1 billion. Sadly, he would pass away a year later, but Morris Wilson would take the reins as the Great Depression was underway. Most impressive of all, during a calamitous time where banks were falling south of the border, not a single Canadian bank failed during the Great Depression. Later on, the company would again demonstrate vision and leadership amongst the Canadian banks by becoming the first Canadian bank to use a computer, as they thought they could use it for accounting, and in 1967, they became the first Canadian bank to process a transaction by computer. Though I'm skipping a bit ahead. That same year, in 1929, the RBC Art Collection was created. Today, that collection has 4,500 pieces, lodged across offices in Canada, New York City, and London. And this is the third reason for RBC's success: diversification. Currently, RBC has diversified its business into 5 core divisions: personal and commercial banking, RBC Wealth Management, RBC Capital Markets, RBC Insurance, and Investory and Treasury Services. As another example, in 1955, while led by Jimmy Muir, the bank diversified and expanded into consumer mortgages. Within 3 years, they would hold 38% of all mortgages in Canada. In 1972, they would add to their credit card offerings, where they would go up to sign more than 570,000 clients for their Charge X product, a precursor brand to what is now known as Visa. By 1991, they became the first bank to receive approval to underwrite corporate securities in the US under their subsidiary RBC Dominion Securities. In 2015, they would expand their exposure in private and commercial banking and wealth management in the US by purchasing City National Bank in Los Angeles for $5 billion. A few years later, RBC would expand its US advisory operations by acquiring SunTrust Banks for a staggering 28 billion US dollars, which would be the world's biggest bank merger in over 10 years. Through this deal, they would become the sole advisor to BB&T Corp. The next reason for their success is brand value. Their strong leadership paved the way for competitive advantage that still holds true to this day. From the start of World War II until its end, RBC's assets grew from $955 million to $2 billion in 5 trying years. Their president, Morris Wilson, also participated in the war, ensuring that critical supplies were sent and arriving in Europe. In 1947, RBC sponsored the Canadian Olympic Association, which would become the longest Olympic sponsorship in our nation's history. Just over a decade later, with captured soldiers held abroad, and the US and Cuba not speaking to each other, RBC employees had to act as intermediaries in the aftermath of the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. They played a key role, ensuring the freedom of the troops in exchange for medicine and food. A year later, in 1962, they would be a key player in the creation of Place Ville-Marie, Canada's first skyscraper, which became its headquarters in Montreal. Now, I may not have witnessed this, but in 1968, they also initiated an important advertising strategy, introducing a bank teller named Mary, which would be a major hit as she became the best known advertising personality in the nation with exposure on radio, print, and on TV. The next and final reason for their continued success is their ability to produce consistent earnings growth. In 1960, W. Earl McLaughlin, one of the company's most reputable figures who influenced their rise to the top, became the bank's president. At his start, he took the company from $4 billion in assets, and by 1980, he would have pumped that number to $62 billion, adding around 600 branches around the world within that time too. The company had successfully paid shareholders a dividend every year since 1870. In fact, since the year 2000, RBC's dividend rose from 14 cents to $1.32 per quarter, never halting or decreasing their dividend during that time. Because of their rich history of paying investors, they are renowned as a dividend aristocrat. Even during the financial crisis of 2009, the bank was able to maintain their dividends due to their conservative and risk-averse strategies. The Royal Bank came from humble beginnings and a noble mission to help their communities flourish, and have since grown to become arguably the most prominent and trusted of the big 5 banks in the nation, and a worldwide leader of their financial industry. Their financial position, focus on purpose, vision, and values, diversification strategies, brand value, and consistent earnings growth were large contributors to their journey to the top. Their story is one that should truly inspire Canadians to seize opportunities to grow while also giving back to society. Like this behemoth, will make someday happen. If you have any cool stories about RBC, leave them in the comment section. I would love to hear all about them. Thank you for watching.